The early morning silence of our suburban streets shattered like glass under a thunderclap. Blades thumped overhead. Lawns trembled. Karen, queen of the HOA and self-appointed guardian of community peace, sprinted barefoot in a bathrobe across her perfectly manicured lawn, holding a megaphone in one hand and a garden rake in the other. "He's invading," she screamed as a matte black helicopter descended gracefully onto the neighborhood's Central Park field, kicking up a tornado of mulch, dog toys, and newspaper coupons. Flamingo statues flew through the air like pink missiles. Karen's wig detached mid-run and sailed into the fountain with a splash that echoed the confusion of every blue-eyed resident watching from their porches. From the belly of the helicopter, the door swung open with a cinematic hiss, and I stepped out, calm, suited in light tactical gear, clipboard in hand, sunglasses still fogged from the change in altitude. I glanced at Karen. She froze, rake still raised, as I simply nodded and walked past her like a man who just dropped into a different dimension. "Good morning," I said evenly. "You might want to stay clear of the landing zone." 24 hours earlier, the chaos had been a mere idea on a secure phone line in my home office, nestled behind a bookshelf full of fake birdhouses and one very real safe. I was reading a briefing memo while pretending to browse lawnmower reviews for the HOA group chat. "Operation Canyon Echo will commence at 500. Location confirmed. Suburban Park Alpha." I smirked at the code. They meant our HOA's picnic spot, the one Karen banned boxball from after claiming the sound was spiritually grating. I sipped my coffee and texted the ops team to begin atmospheric scans for the test zone. Nobody knew what was coming. That's the point of a surprise readiness drill, especially in a community where the biggest emergency last year was a flamingo statue theft scandal that led to a 5-hour HOA meeting and 2 divorces. I'd moved here 5 years ago under a modest cover identity. Government work requires the occasional low-profile residence, and what better place to blend in than among overly enthusiastic lawn maintenance competitions and people who think recycling bins should be color-coordinated with the season. My real job was planning federal emergency simulations, the kind that test everything from natural disasters to terror responses without tipping off the civilians around them. Suburbia was perfect. Plenty of variables, unsuspecting participants, and just the right amount of nosy neighbors to make the chaos authentic. This time, the goal was to simulate an urban rescue response under opposition conditions. The opposition, our own Karen. Karen first caught wind of something unusual when the chopper did its pre-drill survey past late Tuesday. She was doing Tai Chi in her driveway, and the gust blew her incense burner straight into her peonies. She stormed over to my house within minutes, slapping my rain can with her flip-flop like it had insulted her ancestors. I opened the door to find her already halfway through a lecture on aerial terrorism by noise pollution. "I don't care if you're renting or if you got clearance from the FAA or FBI or the freaking Space Command," she shrieked. "This is a community zone, not a helipad for your midlife crisis." I offered her a polite smile and a bottle of water. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the purpose of the flight, Karen. It's under review by the appropriate authorities." "Oh, so now you're one of those? The secret agent wannabe types? You think you're slick with your black SUV and your fake dog tags." She glanced over my shoulder into the house and narrowed her eyes. "You don't even have a dog." "I do," I said, pointing to the lazy beagle snoring under the dining table. "He's just not much of a barker." She left, huffing and promising legal consequences. I spent the next hour watching her attempt to measure the dimensions of the park with a retractable tape, yelling into her phone at someone she kept calling Greg from Channel 9. Greg, as I later found out, was the weatherman. By the evening, the HOA had called an emergency meeting at the clubhouse. I wasn't invited, of course. Karen made sure of that. But I got updates through the neighborhood dad group, who were way more interested in the helicopter than her tantrums. Apparently, she was drafting a no-fly zone policy based on a sample letter she downloaded from a parenting blog about drones. She presented a PowerPoint titled "Protecting Our Skies: Suburbia versus Surveillance," featuring grainy zoomed-in screenshots of my backyard. One of the slides had a squirrel she claimed was acting suspicious. Meanwhile, my team had already begun setting up comms in the mobile unit 2 blocks over, disguised as a plumbing van. Tomorrow morning would be go time. Our simulation would drop a rescue team into a civilian conflict zone, where unpredictable variables like neighborhood interference, poor signage, and unplanned obstacles would test the team's ability to adapt. Karen naturally was about to become the most realistic obstacle of all. That night, as I reviewed logistics with my operations team and triple-checked the flight path, Karen sent out a community-wide email titled "Warning: Suspicious activity near playground. Possible coded signals." She attached a blurry photo of me mowing my lawn. The subject line: "Red shirt equals red alert." The next morning came fast. Too fast for the HOA, which had apparently decided to barricade the park with lawn chairs, garden gnomes, and a few ironically placed bird feeders strung up like barriers. But nothing could stop what came next. The sound of the approaching chopper started low, like distant thunder, and then built into a monstrous rhythm that sent dogs into howling frenzies and babies into strollers like missiles. The entire neighborhood peeked from blinds, mouths agape. Karen burst into the field in her bathrobe, waving a sign that read, "This is not a helipad." And then the helicopter descended, calm, controlled, precise. The air filled with swirling petals, panic, and pure cinematic madness. As I stepped out, flanked by 2 silent operators in black uniforms, the only sound was Karen's voice squeaking from a half-functioning megaphone. "You don't have clearance for this." I looked at her. I looked at the sea of neighbors frozen in disbelief, and then I smiled. "Actually," I said, "you don't." The aftermath of the helicopter landing left the neighborhood in a daze. For most, it was a thrilling, albeit confusing, disruption to their otherwise sleepy Wednesday. For Karen, it was the equivalent of a declaration of war. By 9:00 a.m., she had already summoned the HOA board, drafted an emergency noise ordinance, and plastered signs around the park that read, "Aircraft Free Zone by order of the HOA." The signs were laminated. She even added QR codes linking to a PDF titled "The Right to Peaceful Suburbia." A few residents tried to tell her she didn't have the legal authority to enforce anything of the sort, but she shushed them with the kind of stare that could turn a barbecue into a civil lawsuit. I kept to myself. That was always the plan, but the simulation was just getting started, and the HOA's hysterics were already feeding the realism metrics we needed. The exercise was meant to test our ability to coordinate rescue efforts in hostile suburban conditions, whatever that meant. Apparently, it meant Karen. Our team had set up the command hub inside a fake plumbing truck parked discreetly behind my garage. Inside, monitors displayed heat maps of the park, drone feeds, and team position indicators. Outside, my neighbor Patrick thought the van was offering a new luxury bidet installation service and asked for a quote. I didn't have the heart to tell him it was equipped with encrypted comms and enough surveillance tech to listen in on a whisper through a concrete wall. The HOA emergency meeting that followed Karen's public meltdown was held in the clubhouse, an aggressively beige structure with terrible acoustics and motivational posters about pet waste. I wasn't invited, of course, but the walls were thin. I parked my lawn chair outside and trimmed hedges while they ranted just a few feet away. Karen opened with a slideshow titled "The Sky Menace, a Community in Crisis." Her first claim was that I had used unauthorized airspace for military propaganda. Someone asked if helicopters were even illegal. Karen waved them off and moved to her next slide. An image of the helicopter mid-landing with the caption "Enemy at our gates." She passed around a sign-up sheet labeled "Helicopter Watch," urging neighbors to take turns reporting any future rotor-related activity. The sheet came with time slots, walkie-talkies, and laminated ID tags. Karen even passed out orange vests. Only 3 people signed up, 2 retirees and her husband Doug, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I heard one man suggest that maybe it was all part of some kind of government training exercise. Karen snapped so fast her chair almost tipped. That's exactly what he wants you to think. He's using psychological camouflage. He's like a suburban Jason Bourne. By the time the meeting ended, the HOA had agreed to submit a petition to the city council demanding a ban on all low-altitude aircraft within half a mile of the HOA boundaries. I'm pretty sure they thought that included drones, planes, and hot air balloons. Karen walked out of the clubhouse like a general who just conquered airspace law. The next morning, the absurdity reached new heights. I opened my front door to find a large fluorescent orange sticker slapped across my mailbox. In bold font, it read, "Violation. Unauthorized aerial activity." It was signed HOA Compliance Division, which I knew wasn't real because I literally helped write the real compliance code as a part-time contributor to the city's Emergency Management Task Force. I peeled it off and went about my business, smiling at the thought that Karen believed sticker slapping was a form of bureaucratic warfare. But the best moment came mid-afternoon when a tow truck showed up at the park. The driver, wearing sunglasses and looking thoroughly unimpressed, walked slowly around the helicopter that still sat stationed at the field. Karen followed him like a lawyer prepping for trial, pointing at the skids, waving printouts of parking regulations, and yelling over the roar of a lawnmower nearby. The driver finally asked, "Ma'am, you want me to tow the helicopter?" She nodded. He paused. Then he said, "Yeah, no, not with my insurance," got back in his truck, and drove away. Karen was not deterred. She ordered a few HOA volunteers to place construction cones around the chopper. They arranged them in a tight square, which didn't do anything other than give passing joggers the impression that someone had spilled orange Jenga blocks. That evening, she sent another email blast accusing me of occupying a public park with militarized equipment in violation of the community's peaceful character. She added screenshots from Google Maps and included a link to an online petition titled "Round the Menace." Meanwhile, my commanding officer called for a progress update. I assured him things were going great. We've got live civilian hostility, environmental disruptions, and a volunteer opposition force led by a woman with a megaphone and a personalized clipboard. He laughed and said, "Perfect. That's exactly what FEMA was hoping for. Full simulation remains green lit. Continue as planned." Later that night, under the cover of dusk, the next phase of our operation began. 2 field agents disguised as surveyors arrived in a nondescript van and quietly unloaded crates of mock trike kits and inflatable barriers into a staging area near the tennis court. Karen, always suspicious of any activity not pre-approved by her, immediately sent her husband to go check what those guys are doing. Doug approached the agents, asked a few questions, and returned with a bewildered expression. "They said they're testing soil compaction for a potential playground expansion," he mumbled. Karen narrowed her eyes and muttered something about infiltration tactics, but she wasn't done. That night, just after 11 p.m., she posted a long, rambling status on Nextdoor accusing me of operating an illegal airbase. "He's got flight logs." I saw them, and code words on a dry erase board like Alpha Sector Breach and Zone 3 Extraction. Normal people don't use those words. I think he's running a fake rescue squad as a cover for something bigger. Stay vigilant. The post got 17 likes, including one from someone named Patrick's second account, which I suspect was Patrick testing how the app worked. By now, the neighborhood was split. Half thought it was the most exciting thing to happen since the Great Lawn Flamingo Massacre. The other half wanted me to move. A few teenagers even made a parody TikTok of Karen yelling at the helicopter, dubbing over her rant with dramatic opera music and labeling it Suburbia, the musical. I watched it 3 times. It was excellent. The drill was nearing its climax. We were scheduled for a pre-dawn final operation, a full-scale rescue simulation involving 3 more helicopters, 6 field agents, and several FEMA observers posing as civilians. It was all about to culminate in a spectacle that would either vindicate me completely or push Karen into full-on conspiracy theorist status. Either way, I was ready. The only question was whether the HOA was. The night before the final simulation, the air in the neighborhood felt charged, like a thunderstorm was brewing but never arriving. I sat on my porch sipping tea, watching as Karen marched up and down the sidewalk with a flashlight and a walkie-talkie, pretending to run patrols. She wore a neon vest that said HOA Security Advisor in bold letters across the back. clearly made on a home printer and ironed onto fabric. Every time a leaf rustled or a squirrel darted across the grass, she'd whip around like she just spotted enemy forces. Her husband trailed behind her, holding a clipboard and yawning so hard he almost dropped it. The real fun started when Karen saw one of our agents in the alley behind my house, unloading equipment from a disguised FEMA vehicle. She couldn't resist. She grabbed her phone and tried to covertly film the operation from behind a bush, narrating in whispers like a spy in a low-budget thriller. Target spotted. Unknown male, possibly Eastern European, she was repeating. Foreign operative sighted with suspicious gear. The agent was actually from Boston and had a thick accent that made him sound more like a lobster fisherman than anything remotely intimidating. He caught her filming, waved politely, and said, "Evening, ma'am." Karen screamed and fell backward into her own hydrangeas. By the time she scrambled out, covered in leaves and grass clippings, she was on the phone with what she loudly claimed was Homeland Security. In reality, it was most likely the HOA's legal advisor, a semi-retired real estate attorney named Victor, who once sued a bakery for putting gluten-free labels too close to the cookies. Karen, however, had fully committed to the fantasy. "Yes, I'm telling you this man is coordinating with at least 3 other unregistered individuals. They're storing supplies, using military code, and possibly operating a drone surveillance network. I'm 90% sure he's not even a real resident." The agents finished their setup and drove off with zero fanfare, leaving Karen shouting into her phone and pacing like she was giving orders to a SWAT team. The situation escalated further when she decided to break into my backyard. At around midnight, I was alerted by motion sensors that someone had entered the secured side gate. I activated the lights and switched to live cam view. There she was, Karen, hunched over, flashlight in her mouth, trying to peer through my garage window while using her phone to take pictures. I sighed, put on my robe, and walked out the front door. She didn't hear me approach until I cleared my throat from behind. She yelped, nearly dropped her phone, and spun around, caught red-handed. "This is a private investigation," she said, trying to sound official. "Under the Neighborhood Safety Act of 2009, I have authority to inspect any suspicious property on HOA grounds." I pointed at the small, clearly posted sign by the gate, "No trespassing. Federal Oversight Zone." Her eyes scanned it quickly, then dismissed it. "That's not a real thing," she said. "It's real enough to have legal weight," I replied calmly. "And this garage is under surveillance by federal personnel." Karen huffed and stormed off, claiming I was bluffing and that she would expose me at tomorrow's HOA summit. I let her go. It didn't matter. By morning, the truth would be too big for even her to deny. Around 4 in the morning, the neighborhood was blanketed in fog. It wasn't natural fog. Our team had deployed environmental effects to simulate limited visibility. It gave the streets an eerie, almost cinematic look. The first of the black helicopters appeared just before dawn. Its lights cut through the haze like a scene from a disaster movie. Residents were already beginning to stir, looking out windows, murmuring, confused and a little afraid. By the time the second and third helicopters arrived, the entire block was lit up. Dogs were barking. Porch lights flicked on. People in robes and slippers came out onto lawns, staring upward in disbelief. The helicopters hovered, synchronized and quiet, until one by one they descended into the park, the field glowing with portable lights our team had positioned the night before. Tactical teams deployed from each craft with precision, landing and fanning out in formation. Karen, now fully dressed in what I could only describe as apocalypse librarian chic, ran into the middle of the street, waving her HOA flag like a surrender signal. "This is private property," she shrieked into her megaphone. "You are violating at least 3 municipal codes." An agent approached her calmly, flashed a badge, and said, "Ma'am, this area is currently under federal simulation protocol. You need to stand down." She blinked at him. "Simulation? What simulation?" "I haven't authorized any drills." The agent repeated the phrase "federal simulation protocol" 3 more times, each time with increasing boredom. She didn't budge. Finally, they escorted her gently to the side, where her husband waited awkwardly, sipping coffee from a thermos and pretending not to know her. Meanwhile, the full-scale rescue drill was now in full motion. Teams set up triage stations. Mock casualties, volunteer actors, were evacuated from fake rubble zones we constructed using inflatable building facades. Drones flew overhead, mapping movements. FEMA observers scribbled notes furiously as they watched the unfolding operation. It was flawless. Karen stood frozen, watching as the neighborhood she thought she controlled was transformed into a fully operational crisis training ground. Her mouth hung open as she saw her precious HOA bulletin board reproposed into a field comms post. Her rose bushes had been trimmed to make way for an emergency landing corridor. A volunteer medic accidentally stepped on one of her garden gnomes. She let out a tiny sob. News vans arrived not long after. Apparently someone, possibly one of the agents, had tipped them off for PR purposes. A local reporter, camera rolling, approached Karen mid-meltdown and asked her to explain what was happening. She launched into a rambling speech about unauthorized aircraft, fake neighbors, and covert surveillance. The reporter blinked slowly, then turned to the camera and said, "Back to you, Mike. Things appear to be escalating in the suburbs." It all wrapped up 2 hours later. Helicopters lifted off. Teams packed up. The FEMA observers clapped. I stood near the sidewalk, quietly debriefing my superior, when Karen approached, flanked by 2 HOA board members who looked like they'd just been hit with a truck full of reality. "So," she said, arms crossed, voice quivering with a cocktail of confusion and anger, "what exactly is going on here?" I looked her in the eyes. "Rescue drill. FEMA-sanctioned, multi-agency operation. You were incredibly helpful in testing civilian interference variables." She opened her mouth, closed it, and then opened it again. No words came out. One of the board members patted her shoulder gently and said, "Maybe we should go inside." As she walked away, head down. The last thing she said was barely audible, but still very Karen. "I'm still filing a noise complaint." The next few hours after the simulation ended were unlike anything our neighborhood had ever seen. It was as if someone had dropped a Hollywood movie set into the middle of our cul-de-sac and then quietly packed it away before breakfast. Most of the residents stood outside in a stunned silence, clutching coffee mugs and bathrobes, trying to process what they had just witnessed. A few kids were cheering and pretending to be commandos, jumping from porch steps and yelling things like "Alpha Team Go" and "Rescue the teddy bear." But the adults, they looked like they were still waiting for someone to yell "cut." The media had arrived in full force, not just the local channel that usually covered pumpkin festivals, but 2 regional news vans and even a freelance journalist from some federal watchdog blog. Microphones were being shoved in faces. Cameras were panning across destroyed landscaping, and the main feature of every shot was Karen, now sitting on a folding chair at the edge of the park with her arms crossed, sunglasses on, and a scarf tied tightly under her chin like she was shielding herself from radioactive truth. She refused to answer any questions, but that didn't stop one ambitious reporter from calling her the spark that ignited a neighborhood storm. As for me, I had been pulled aside by FEMA representatives for a formal debrief. They were thrilled. The operation had gone off better than expected, and the unplanned civilian conflict, meaning Karen and the HOA's antics, had added a layer of realism that pushed the scenario into top-tier results. They mentioned using this event as a case study in future crisis simulations and asked if I would be open to leading a permanent task force on suburban readiness zones. I said I'd consider it depending on whether I could avoid HOA meetings for the rest of my life. The real show, however, started when the mayor arrived. A sleek black car pulled up, flanked by 2 patrol vehicles, and out stepped the mayor in his signature blue suit with the City Strong pin gleaming on his lapel. He'd been briefed in advance and knew exactly what the event was and why it had taken place. But in true political fashion, he acted as though he personally authorized every detail. Cameras followed him as he walked confidently across the park, shaking hands with volunteers and posing beside the helicopter for photos. Then, to everyone's surprise, he called an impromptu press conference, right there on Karen's precious soccer field. With cameras rolling, The mayor cleared his throat and began a speech so carefully crafted it probably came from a team of writers who had been fed the night's events an hour before. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "what you witnessed today was a vital exercise in public safety coordination and emergency preparedness. It's not every day that a neighborhood gets to play such an important role in our city's resilience planning." He then turned to me, gesturing like he was introducing a Nobel Prize winner. "I want to thank Mr. Marcus Reed, who you all know as your neighbor and friend, for leading this operation with integrity and composure. What many of you didn't know until now is that Mr. Reed is a tactical operations commander with the Homeland Crisis Division. His work has saved lives during natural disasters and national emergencies across the country. And now, thanks to this drill, it may one day save lives right here in our own backyard." The crowd erupted in applause. People I barely knew suddenly looked at me with wide eyes and admiration. A few came up afterward to shake my hand and apologize for thinking I was just the guy who walked weirdly fast to his mailbox. Even Patrick, who once accused me of overwatering my lawn, patted me on the back and said, "I always knew you were up to something big." And then came the moment that silenced even the wind. The mayor glanced over at Karen, still seated in her folding chair, and said, "We also want to extend a thank you to the HOA for their enthusiastic involvement. Their reactions provided crucial realism to the exercise and reminded us just how unpredictable a crisis can be." Karen's head snapped up so fast her sunglasses slid down her nose. She stood, adjusted her scarf, and tried to look dignified, but her eye twitched, and her mouth formed a tight smile that never quite reached her cheeks. She muttered something about unauthorized use of taxpayer-funded grass and marched off toward the clubhouse like a retired queen forced to watch her castle host a rock concert. What followed was a slow unraveling of everything Karen had worked for. Residents started asking questions, real questions, about how the HOA had responded. Why were they trying to tow a helicopter? Why had they accused a federal agent of staging a military cosplay? Why were funds used to print dozens of anti-aircraft zone signs when the HOA budget barely covered the pool heater? Within 2 days, an emergency vote was called to reevaluate the board's leadership. Karen, still clinging to her position, argued that everything she did was in defense of community peace. But it was hard to justify her actions when a video of her yelling, "You don't have clearance to land here," had been memed and spread across multiple platforms. One version had her voice auto-tuned. Another had been edited into a dramatic space battle scene. In private, she tried to save face. She told people the operation lacked transparency, that the helicopters had damaged her tulip bed, and that no one respects the bylaws anymore. But even her closest supporters began to distance themselves. At the next HOA meeting, one I was finally invited to, she arrived 20 minutes late, sat in the back, and didn't speak once. And then, as if the universe was making a final point, FEMA delivered a thank you plaque to the HOA for their unintentional but invaluable role in civilian unpredictability simulation. It was presented at a city event, and Karen had to accept it on behalf of the HOA. She smiled for the cameras but looked like she was chewing glass. After the ceremony, I approached her with a calm nod. "You did help make it all feel real," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "In fact, we're thinking of naming one of the internal scenario models after you." She blinked slowly. "A scenario model?" "Yes," I said. "It's a training module, simulates neighborhood-based resistance to federal coordination. We're calling it the Karen Protocol." Her jaw dropped. I walked away. Behind me, I heard her say, "I will sue everyone in this town." But I knew the only thing she'd be filing now was a resignation. The following week rolled in like a long exhale after a held breath. The chaos had died down. The helicopters were long gone, and the neighborhood had returned to its typical rhythm of early dog walks, joggers with wireless earbuds, and sprinklers clicking away in synchronized loops. Yet something fundamental had shifted. There was a new energy in the air, a quiet realization among the residents that their little corner of suburbia had been at the center of something much larger than weekend bake sales and lawn gnome disputes. And at the center of it all, whether they liked it or not, was me, The HOA held one final emergency meeting, not the dramatic kind with laminated signs and shouting matches, but a far more somber affair. Karen was noticeably absent. Her resignation had come in via email the night before, laced with passive-aggressive undertones and a thinly veiled threat to pursue new leadership opportunities elsewhere. She also attached a 23-page document outlining suggestions for the next HOA president, most of which revolved around mandatory silence hours and surveillance shrubbery. Nobody read past page 2. During the meeting, the remaining board members unanimously voted me in as the new security liaison. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The title itself was made up on the spot, probably just to keep the residents satisfied that someone official would now be handling anything that looked remotely like a drone, a helicopter, or a suspicious van. I accepted with a simple nod, more amused than anything. If nothing else, it was a fitting end to the saga. They handed me a cheap plastic badge and a key card to the clubhouse. I didn't tell them I had already installed federal-grade access controls the day before. Over the next few days, FEMA officials returned to finalize documentation and survey follow-up interviews. A small team set up equipment in the community center to run resident feedback sessions. Most neighbors were surprisingly supportive. A few admitted they had been skeptical at first, but after seeing the scale of the drill and learning what it meant for public safety, they changed their tune. Even Patrick, who had once accused me of secret government bird spying, confessed that he felt safer knowing someone nearby could handle an actual emergency. There was one unexpected hiccup. The city decided to formally designate the park as a potential future training site, which triggered another wave of HOA panic. Some residents worried it would mean monthly helicopter visits. Others hoped it would mean property value increases due to neighborhood prestige. Karen, who had not been seen in public since the plaque incident, mailed out flyers titled "Don't Let FEMA Take Our Field," featuring an image of a crying child photoshopped next to a tank. Nobody took it seriously. One neighbor made T-shirts out of it. Eventually, the final stage of the drill documentation was complete. FEMA sent a polished thank you letter addressed to the entire neighborhood. It acknowledged the community's authentic, unscripted involvement as a major contributor to the success of the simulation. At the bottom, it read, "Special thanks to the HOA for their vivid portrayal of spontaneous resistance and non-compliant civilian interaction." It was framed and placed in the clubhouse, right above the bulletin board where Karen used to post parking violations with Scotch tape. Despite everything, I found myself oddly fond of the place. The absurdity, the drama, even the rogue HOA patrols had provided a kind of entertainment no government simulation could ever predict. As I walked the neighborhood each morning, people nodded or waved. Some saluted as a joke. A few offered to buy me coffee, asked for stories about what other cities I'd worked in, or even if the CIA used pigeons. I told them only some things were classified. Then one afternoon, as I was checking the newly reinstalled park gate, a delivery truck pulled up to my house. Out stepped 2 FEMA logistics agents carrying a crate the size of a refrigerator. I hadn't ordered anything. They grinned and said, "Courtesy of the department, you've been officially designated as the on-site liaison for Suburban Readiness Zone Echo 3. I opened the crate to find a portable operations kit, comms, digital mapping software, emergency medical gear, and a sat-link antenna disguised as a bird bath. It came with a manual titled Rapid Deployment Protocols for Semi-Cooperative Residential Areas. I stored it in the garage, right next to the HOA violation stickers Karen had once plastered on my trash bins. It felt like the universe's way of saying, thanks for the chaos. But nothing topped the final moment. A week after the last drill debrief, a large group of residents organized a community appreciation night. They called it the Heli Happy Hour. There were cupcakes with tiny black helicopters on top, music from action movie soundtracks, and even a bounce house shaped like a rescue chopper. Someone had made a spoof documentary that combined real footage from the drill with dramatic narration, slow zooms on Karen's meltdowns, and random explosions added in for flair. It was the kind of tongue-in-cheek humor that only comes from surviving something together. Something ridiculous, unforgettable, and bizarrely bonding. Toward the end of the event, The mayor reappeared, apparently invited as a surprise guest. He presented me with a plaque that read, "For exceptional service in the face of suburban resistance." Then, just as he was about to leave, he leaned in and whispered, "By the way, they're thinking of piloting a new HOA liaison training series. Want to be the face of it?" I laughed hard. Then I told him if it came with hazard pay, I might consider it. As the sun set on the event, casting warm light across the park that had once been a battleground of egos and rotor blades, I stood quietly and watched the families laugh, the kids run, and the music play. And I thought about how strange life could be. One day you're trimming hedges in silence, and the next you're leading a covert rescue simulation surrounded by panicked neighbors and laminated complaints. Before heading home, I passed the wooden park sign, now painted freshly and gleaming in the light. A new plaque had been nailed beneath it. It read, "In recognition of the most unexpected training exercise in suburban history, code name Karen Protocol." I didn't write it, but I knew exactly who did.